From Vassar College, this is Conversations at the Salt Line with Wesley Dixon.
On this episode, a conversation with Allison Abner.
Hello everyone, it's me, Wes, with another episode of Conversations at the Salt Line. And today, I'm so happy to welcome an incredible guest. I'm laughing because we're texting about the word incredible earlier. But our guest today is none other than Allison Abner, class of 87 at Vassar. Tons of titles associated with her. Author, TV writer, activist, you name it. She's done it. Thanks for being here, Allison.
So it's just like surreal being back here.
Tell me more about it.
It's just, in some ways, nothing has changed, right? Like even taking the train up here, but also a lot has changed. I mean, the campus is just beautiful, but I can see like there's a whole new group of kids. It's a totally different generation, and they're just as expressive and clearly really independent-minded and diverse in thought and backgrounds, and I don't know. It's
like you, like all of us, right?
Yeah, thankfully.
It's cool. As you know, you have kids, you've lived a long enough life. The world is just so cyclical, and college is no different, right? It's sort of built into the nature of people cycling out every 4 to 6 years or whatever. But even beyond that, generationally, sort of the same kinds of things happen, same vibes, different stories, but same overall arc, right? The same kinds of protest, activism, worldly issues, frankly, that sort of influence life on campus happen today, happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
It wasn't as active back in my time.
Really?
No, I was, it was like Reagan, and I was like geared up and ready to go.
Yeah.
Like my dad, I came from a political background, and he wasn't in politics, but he was a political person.
He had opinions.
Yeah, and from grassroots activism. And I was like, okay, come on, let's, my brother was at Amherst doing the, South African apartheid divestment and all that. And it was just a little like, until, I think I mentioned to you before, until ACT UP.
Yeah.
And then a lot of my friends here who were, kind of in the queer organizations and feminist organizations went, they were super active in New York. Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, I want to dial it back a few years from that because I'm always curious about folks' childhoods because so much of who we are as adults, not everything, but a lot of it is sort of shaped by our most formative years in childhood. And you happen to have a really interesting childhood, or I imagine it to be a really interesting childhood. Can you talk a little bit about in particular, who your dad was, and sort of how growing up in a household with your father influenced just your outlook on life at that age?
So he was in the music business. He had been, years and years before I was born, was one of the sort of founding members of VJ Records. And that was, I can't even tell you how many different groups there were. They were the first ones to sign the Beatles in the United States. But when I was coming up, he was vice president and then president of Motown. And, the first question people ask is like, did you know this person? Did you know that? Did you know that person? And we did. I mean, my parents took us everywhere.
Wow.
So, if we were going to see Sly and the Family Stone or Aretha or Diana Ross or whatever, we'd be there.
So casual. Look at
very,
you, like childhood groupie.
Hang out and so, and then later after that, he became Stevie Wonder's manager. And so that was a whole sort of era in our lives. And he had already been a large part of our lives before that because he and my dad were really close. And Marvin Gaye, they were really close. So
that's so wonderful. We were just in Portland for Vassar at a campaign event last week. I was in Seattle when I called you, but we were in Portland last week, and I met this cool alum who actually used to be the head of music at Nike. And so it was super interesting talking to him because he was telling stories about just like, all the cool, fun ideas that Nike has sort of played with in terms of, collaborations with big record labels like Motown or others, and you can imagine all the different steps they have to go through to get licensing for whether commercials or whatever. But it was such a cool sort of entree into the music world,
and the ways
sideways, in which it's
and
so
it's like more
different.
Like curation.
It was exactly it, right?
In partnership,
exactly. And he was saying, it was just funny because you might think that job entails one thing, but of course entails many other different things, right?
Yeah.
So it was fun. I can't imagine growing up in that kind of a household.
So he was different than a lot of people. He was one of the rare people that had degrees, as a music executive. And he was always about kind of, he was an activist also. So he marched with King. He was very dedicated to, because he was quite a bit older than my mom. So
Okay.
he was like a generation and a half, older than like say most parents. But he was very dedicated to integrating, different, whatever it was, a beach, a restaurant, a hotel. He would never shy from that. And he was really close with Jesse back in the day. And then when he was with Stevie had, his whole, in the 80s, I would say a huge part of his focus was the King holiday. And so that was something that the Martin Luther King holiday just, had a lot of pushback from, certain conservatives. And so it took years to actually, make it happen. And then, and my dad was very involved kind of in that process with him. And,
Wow.
It took a lot of heavy lifting from, like the CBC and, Donna Brazil, like a lot of people in Congress and people working in the grassroots, just trying to make it happen.
Yeah. It's so funny. We all have different opinions on this, but I think it's so natural for entertainment and music to sort of be a cousin to or coupled with politics, right? But I'm thinking back to more recently, sort of one of Beyonce's Super Bowl performances, and you sort of hear people sort of crying out in frustration, right, about the ways in which certain kinds of politics and certain kinds of music are coupled, and people always want them to sort of be separate and sort of agnostic to each other, but that's just not historically sort of how these things go, right? Particularly among like Black music or music of color, there's sort of this activist spirit built into it in many ways, particularly in this country.
Yeah, and some artists see themselves as activists and some don't.
Right.
So, it really kind of depends on kind of if they have that sense of purpose.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the vision that they have for their career. And other people, they just want to be as big as they can be and reach as many people.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
It's a little bit different.
I want to pivot. We just talked a little bit about your childhood, but I think what many folks who may know of you may not know is that you've also written books about childhood, raising children, sort of that sort of stage in a person's life. And in particular, I know of two books you've written. One is sort of a book for teenage girls for sort of self-esteem, sort of how to navigate life as a teenage girl. And then one book I believe is titled The Black Parenting Guide. Correct me if I'm wrong. Those such interesting sort of projects to embark on. Can you reflect on what motivated you to take on that work early in your career, I should say?
Yeah, so I was a journalist. I worked in television at the time and also like actually during college and then after. And because I freelanced really my whole career, I also just wanted to write. And so one of the sort of like mentors that I had was Linda Villarosa, who is just a phenomenal, she's just an incredible journalist. She's at the Times now. And she was the one who broke the story on Black maternal health and mortality. And it has become, there's caucuses in Congress and all that. She's just really exceptional. And she was at Essence at the time, and she was just under Susan Thomas. And she said, look, she had been a health and very into public health and all that. And she said, why don't you start writing for me? So she was like, I'll show you how to do it. I know you can do it. So I would write articles for them. And then she said, I want to do a book, but I don't want to do it by myself. Wow. Why don't we do it? I can't remember. Well, it was before Broadway, but the editor wanted her to write another book. And so she said, I want you to do it with me. And it was so much fun. It was called Finding Our Way. And it was the only multicultural book for girls, for teen girls, and really got into every aspect of their lives, and also had a lot of testimonies for, everybody from like a kid having to give up a baby for adoption, just so many different things. And then that was really successful. And then the editor asked us to do another book on Black parenting, because that was just a complete like empty space on the bookshelves. Like there were no guides, really. And a lot of Black parents didn't really want to look at they didn't see those as relevant. And so we saw it as an opportunity to actually introduce kind of new ways of parenting and educate a whole new group and generation of parents. And so we wrote it with a doctor. Her name is Ann Beal, and she's really fantastic. And that was like another, like doing that and the book tour. That's back in the day, because it's not like that anymore. But we had a great. It was a really wonderful experience. Yeah.
It was funny when I read that you had written those books. I was curious if my parents. I grew up in the '90s, so I was curious if my parents had read and bought those books, because they were trying to raise a Black child, and so I wonder if they had taken any advice from you all.
And we all had kids. All of us had kids, and we're trying to figure out kind of. And we each had different parenting styles too, right? So yeah,
that's so interesting. When I read that you'd written those books in sort of the '90s, I couldn't help but think about if you thought or if others thought the book would be helpful or relevant today, right? Because of course the world has changed. In some ways, it might be easier, but also maybe harder to sort of raise children broadly, but also Black children in particular. What are your initial thoughts on just sort of today's world, raising kids today, and what lessons might you add to the book if you were doing sort of a 2023 or 2024 rewrite of the book?
It's a good question. Well, at the time, I think my son was I think he was in pre-K or kindergarten. And, we were trying to be kind of cutting edge, like with the studies for every parent, and the goal was to reach Black parents in particular where they were, and introduce some ideas about breastfeeding and spanking and just, things that are kind of more controversial. And what are the effects if you do one or the other, bottle versus breast? What are the outcomes, and what are the outcomes with spanking? What is that, how does that psychologically affect your child?
Right.
And, I think there are probably, after George Floyd, and obviously I have a son. Linda has a son. I think Ann had a couple girls, but I think I would probably have focused a little more on the boys, just very specifically on the boys. I think at that point there was a lot about girls and what girls need, which
is important.
Yeah, and they've been thriving. I think Black women have really been thriving, and it's so wonderful. And there's so much more scholarship now because of them, because they're, they've, gone to get, multiple degrees, and they're just highly represented in higher education now. So I think compared to where it was when I was there. So yeah,
it's incredible. One of the things too that I, speaking of sort of children, it's a much more, I guess, sort of sobering topic, but I think an important and exciting part of your career is that you've done a lot of work in sort of the early 2010 sort of decade about child trafficking. And so there seems to have been this sort of theme in your life of being interested in and invested in the welfare of children. Can you talk about what brought you to that part of work? It's, of course, distinctly different from a parenting guide, but I think there's a similar sort of nugget that sort of ties them together.
Yeah, it actually kind of ties back to coming to Vassar, too.
Oh, great.
When I first came here, I think it was my first semester, definitely my first year, one of the things I heard about was there was a program to volunteer at the prisons and the pre-release program, and I signed up right away. That was something that I was really, really dedicated to doing for, I would say, like maybe 3 of the years, and I did work in Bedford Hills.
Okay, yeah.
But it was sort of, I guess being raised with the ethic of like, you have got to give back. You have got to use your resources to help other people, especially other kids of color. That was a big, it was just so instilled in us. And so when I was in Washington, I had been, married and then remarried, and my husband worked in the Obama administration, was the economic advisor to the White House. And, I said, I wasn't working because I couldn't keep writing. I was across the country. I couldn't get in a writer's room or anything. So I just kind of gave into the circumstance and decided that I had a certain amount of access. And if I had that access, I had to use it because I only had it for a certain amount of time. And that I knew that I had, there was a White House that would care about these issues. And I actually pulled together with another woman she's a Republican who was at HHS for years, and then worked on the Hill. And she had worked in foster care, and she and I we kind of worked together with an organization, then we peeled off and we did our own. It was sort of like at our kitchen tables, and we put together a bipartisan group of women who heavy hitters on the Hill, like DOJ, and also just sort of had different contacts in different places. So some Republican and some Democrat. I was the only person who hadn't worked in Washington, but I was really good with messaging.
Right.
So,
it's important.
We were the ones who took down Craigslist. We were the ones who, and then we went to, we had a huge symposium at Johns Hopkins and brought together, it was the first time that, domestic child trafficking issue, because they didn't even have the numbers. They couldn't figure it out. Like, what is the goal
no
here?
No scope, no scale.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, we didn't know, like, how big is this problem? And it went, so it was almost like a summit. And we, we pulled in everybody from every department that we could think of, experts from around the world. And we kind of came up with a list of things that we thought needed to happen, even to just open up a line, just like a line of a stream of funding.
Yeah, like
funding,
you do this research, basic research, whatever.
All of
right?
it, yeah,
all that kind of stuff.
Even just for capacity, for someplace for kids to go and have therapeutic treatment. And so, we, the White House, made it one of their initiatives and brought us in and announced. And then I had to leave to go back to LA and work again. But by the time that happened, we got that line item in. It was a really big deal, and it was in VAWA. And so it was, I learned a lot. I thought I knew Washington and how Washington worked before.
You really learned.
I had no idea. And
what are some of the things that you can share? What are some of like the top line things you learned from that experience about the sausage making process in Washington?
There's so many.
Good, bad, ugly, whatever.
I think they're mostly good. Things have really changed, obviously, in the last, six, seven, whatever years. But when I was there, I think one of the big misconceptions is that first of all, everybody's the same, everybody's corrupt and very cynical, and that's just not true. People are there mostly because they kind of have a vision for America, and good or bad, whatever you agree with it or not, that is what they are there to help implement. And they are dedicating their time and lives and resources to do that. And there's so many smart people, so many dedicated people. You were in Washington, so you have a sense of that level of dedication. It doesn't mean people don't have ego. It doesn't mean people aren't competitive.
They're people.
Yeah, but they at the end of it, there's a certain kind of moral core that you have to bring to it. Now, it doesn't make it easy to do, and it doesn't mean that you get everything that you want.
Right.
So what I learned was how sophisticated you have to be in order to accomplish those things.
Yeah, to be effective.
How complicated it is just in order to put together the policy. Then the policy has to then appeal to, different congressional members. Then on top of it, you have to message to the public. And everything is like a chess game because it has to also fit into your overall agenda. And how much, capital are you willing to expend for this to go? It's very, very complicated.
Right.
And it isn't just like, people say, so-and-so could just write an executive order and blah, blah. And it doesn't work that way. And often, if you are bound by not being able to enact things in Congress, then there are ways that you can, they pull in the, whatever department and their legal team and try to figure it out. But for the most part, there are whole departments in the White House of grassroots, like, what do you want? What can we do? How can we fix this? People have access to that and want to hear and want to know and, what's happening on the ground. And just, there are thousands of organizations that are involved at every level. It isn't just people working in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So just seeing that and understanding that and knowing how many checks and balances, even like you were saying, even in HHS, you have a solicitor general, and then you have the attorney just for that department, and then you have all the rules and how how just even the rules for that department are written and how they're executed, and
it's very technical.
It's
sort of
technical,
space,
but you need that because there's money involved, and there's reasons why those laws got put on there. Sometimes they should probably
be outdated.
And you have somebody like Cass Sunstein coming in and crossing them out and condensing them, but
Right.
But for the
It's
most
so
part,
interesting.
that there's a reason, and they're generally designed to protect people.
Yeah. For me, I'll speak for myself. It's a very helpful reflection for you to share because I think it, for lack of a better word, humanizes Washington in some way. And I think we know that Washington is made of people, but I think
And
as
a lot
an
of Black people and brown
institution-
people. And,
absolutely, who are career
Yes.
sort of civil servants in many
Yeah.
ways, right? But I think we think about the institution of Washington broadly defined as one that is sort of corrupt and sort of not a real thing and sort of operates without sort of any sense of reality or decency or humanity. And that's obviously just not true.
Yeah, and also I would say I just am very skeptical and suspicious of people who kind of, well, let's just say the people who don't know better, that's one thing, right? But the
Right.
people who do know better, I feel like I'm just like skeptical, like why kind of foment cynicism and kind of, because it can be kind of a demoralizing.
I was gonna say it's not a very it's not always a productive
Doesn't
stance.
help. No, because that's just, it keeps you from wanting to participate because
Right.
it's sort of like, like I said, the cynicism breeds a bit of like inactiveness
There's like
or
apathy at
yeah,
some point.
apathy,
it can sort of get to that
demoralization.
point, right?
Yes, exactly.
Gosh.
And maybe it's designed to do that sometimes, but you're not going to get what you want.
Yeah. I think the cool thing about this story, about this sort of bipartisan sex trafficking commission, to call it sort of that broadly, is that I think it really does highlight, at least in that instance, it's not always this way, but it highlights sort of that things can get made and be done in Washington, right? It sort of, I think, is the embodiment of what we try to highlight, these salt lines, if you will, in people's lives, right? That it does take people with different skills and access and perspectives to be able to create something that is meaningful to some large number of people, right? And that's sort of I know folks might criticize me for being Pollyanna and that sort of interpretation of it, but I think it is how many things happen.
I will tell you exactly how it actually got on the radar. I had seen a documentary and then I was like, okay, this is the issue. And I researched it like crazy. And I was like, wow, so much is happening here in Washington. And it's so many Black and brown girls and girls that are very, very vulnerable. And it's just happening all around us and we don't know. And it was at the time that Nick Kristof was really talking a lot about Cambodia. And I was like, that's terrible. But also like,
It's happening at home.
It's happening right here.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. And so Valerie Jarrett, was just such a phenomenal person. And I had a really good friend of mine, Evan Ryan, who's married to Tony Blinken. So she and I were very close. And she said, hey, I'll set up a meeting with Valerie. And so we brought in the girls from the documentary and the woman who was kind of running, it's called GEMS, there's a program there in New York. And they talked to her, and then from there it was like, okay, we're going to set up a meeting with you for the AG, and
Right.
blah blah. And so, as we were walking out, because Evan had worked for Biden at the time, she said, why don't you guys come with me? Just come over this way. And so she snuck us in, and she walked us in, and Biden, he has an
Happened to be
office in the
there.
White House too, and so he introduced, some of them peeled off and got lost or whatever, but it was just a couple of these girls. And one of them, she was 19. She had just, I think at 12 years old, I think she got picked up, and it was just a terrible story. And so she sat and told Biden, who was the vice president at the time. And so she was literally just walking through her story. And the phone kept ringing, and he had these like his staffers coming in, like whispering in his ear, and he's like, you know what?
I got to listen to this girl.
Yes. And at a certain point he said, do not interrupt me again. And so he said, keep talking. So he was listening to this girl. She was talking, and just, you could see like everybody was near tears about what she was saying. And in walks Obama. And I stood up because they didn't, it's like, no, you'd have to stand. And everybody stood up. The girl looks and is like, she cannot believe.
Just petrified, yeah.
That she's like,
In
he
his
just
presence.
walked. Yeah. And so he said, Joe, I've been trying to reach you. And he was like, I know, but I'm here with this young woman. She's talking about literally what happened and how abused she was being by a pimp. And he was like, and there was stuff jumping off in Afghanistan and everything. And I was just like, I will always remember that story about him, because that really truly is the kind of person he is.
Wow.
So I was very, very moved by that. And he was like gonna really focus his attention and let her know that she was being heard and her story was important.
That's beautiful. Unfortunately, she went through that, but beautiful that she got the attention that she
and
and others
she deserved.
needed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And and I think those are the ways in which that person now is touched by that story,
Right.
it activates them to
Of
get their
course.
staff on that. Let's
Right.
make that a priority.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. It's so funny because before you came today, of course, so for those listening, I definitely buried the lead. I've not sort of said what many of you might know Allison most for, or recognize her work in. I'll tell you that in a second. But I would never, before I came, I sort of thought, oh, she's not a Washington girl. She's in fact said she's not a Washington girl. Like she was like, I moved to DC because of my husband's job at some point and I hated it. It was awful. But I would never believe you because after hearing you talk about it, I'm like, oh, she knows how DC works. She is like,
I learned.
You learned and you really
learned.
embodied it when
Yeah.
you needed to. But of course, it's so fitting because what many folks know you for is being a writer on The West Wing,
Yeah.
right? Which happened way before any of what we just spoke about.
Is how I got to
It's
Washington.
how you got to Washington,
Yeah.
right? But that's so cool. I have to admit that I had not watched The West Wing before I knew you were coming here.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much
Which
on
episodes
TV.
did you watch?
The ones you wrote.
Oh, really? Oh.
What do you think I am? Like, I'm not going to
Really
watch
good job.
random
Right.
episodes.
That took some time.
I watched the
Okay.
ones you wrote.
Oh.
And we'll talk about one of them in a second.
Okay.
But of course, there's this cool sort of, to be corny, assault line, because obviously sort of Washington and media and entertainment sort of are sometimes seemingly opposed forces, right? And for over the last few
Except
years.
during Correspondence Weekend. But
Well, I was going to say, everyone loves that,
Yeah.
right? Chip Reed was here a couple of weeks ago, and
Oh,
he was
wow.
talking about sort of the relationship between media in a different way in Washington, obviously. We're talking about a different kind of media.
Yeah.
It's sort of entertainment, really, not news. But they always sort of are, they're always sort of dancing together, but they're distinctly separate, if you will, right? Before we get into some West Wing specifics, can you just sort of talk about, of course, personally, you've lived it, but then you've also, in your marriage and also in your career, sort of how do you think about media, entertainment in Washington together? What are sort of the exciting parts of their relationship? What's risky about them being in conversation so much? Just sort of unpack that for us a little bit.
I mean, where do I begin? I mean, Hollywood is entertainment. That's like the first, the job there is.
Truth number one.
Yeah. And their job is not to tell you history. It is not to tell you the truth, which I don't know that that's always a good thing
Yeah.
because, I think sometimes people look at stories that, the reach is so great that, when people see something,
They assume.
they assume it's real.
Right.
They believe it. And it almost becomes a weird historical record in and of itself. So I do believe that there is a responsibility to tell the stories in a way that is either adhering close enough to the fact and doesn't go so far off. I mean, you can do whatever you want, I suppose, if you have the rights to do it, or if it's, kind of,
Right.
a story that's kind of in the public domain. But it matters. It really does matter. And I hope that there is more opportunity for people to tell those real stories, because I think
Right.
they're sometimes the reality is way more interesting than anything you can make up.
I mean, the one you just told, right? I mean,
Yeah.
about the story with Biden
Yeah.
and this young lady and Obama. I mean, that is a story that is ripe for television, right?
Right. It's dramatic.
Right. It's dramatic. It's meaningful, and
Yeah.
it has an arc, but it's real.
It's real. And, and Gene, my husband, who was a consultant on the show, that is one of the great things. And I honestly think that's one of the reasons why it was so good, because Aaron cared about the verisimilitude of the story. He really did. He would change things here and
course.
there. And, because he had his own style.
He's a creative, yeah.
And he's creative. But he would, you could just come in and pitch. As long as you had a good pitch, you could come in and just pitch some really interesting stuff, and he would go for it. He'd be like, okay, let's do it.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
The point you just made, I listened to a podcast about The West Wing. It was on Primetime on Vox. And actually, the podcast was entitled Why is Washington So Obsessed, or something like that. Why is Washington So Obsessed with The West Wing? And it was 20 years after the show had aired. And there was one sort of vignette that they included in the podcast, and it was a story about Hillary Clinton. And it must have been, I don't know, it was when she was Secretary of State, and she was talking to someone who was a Burmese diplomat, sort of consulate official of some sort. And they said to her, or I think they were in some conversation, and they said to her, we really want tips on how to sort of affect democracy sort of in our own sort of local environment. And they said, and the way we've been getting tips to do that is by watching The West Wing. And it was sort of both exciting and motivating sort of comment and story, but also worrying too, right? Because of course, not everything is real, right? It's not always as
but you know what is real is that there is a process to things.
Yep.
It's not coming in with guns. It's
Right.
not, radical,
Touché.
that there is process to these things, and that how hard it is. And there is something to the, like, if you can't see it, you can't really imagine it.
Right.
Right. Like, how do these two forces that may be in a different type of governmental atmosphere get you jailed or whatever, how do you sit down at a table and talk those things out and come to an agreement and then implement that as law? And there's, I do think that is kind of a revelation to a lot of people. I mean, even people in America.
No,
I think
100%.
that's a revelation how things get done,
Right.
and that, and that.
And I think, and how and sort of in what manner, right? Like, I think
The strategy involved is
100%,
crazy.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it is cool. I mean, we think, as you were talking, I reflected on how we often in this era think about representation sort of mostly as sort of people, right? We think about how important representation is in terms of diversity of people and sort of being in certain places, which is very important, and I'm not going to say it's not. But what you described, I think, is also exciting too, because it's representation of process, of sort of ideas, of philosophies, right? Which I think is subtler, but nonetheless important to people to be able to see and consume in ways that are easy for them to consume.
That's right. And having that sort of, they're very kind of, funny and they're the good guys. Like, that they're the good guys. So you kind of get the moral compass, and that's a kind of a given.
Yeah.
And that you're not working from kind of a mustache twirly, like, going to be, kind of take over the world. And, I think for a lot of those stories can be, some are really great. I mean, obviously, but some don't last.
Yeah.
And I think that's often because the idea of just wanting power for power's sake is not interesting.
Yeah.
That's just,
It's not a complicated story.
It's not complicated.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot of places to go. You just have to keep heightening.
Going to the top.
heightening the drama in a way that's sort of like it becomes hyper reality.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. There was a show that I watched. I won't name it, but there was a show that I watched that sort of I could, having not written shows but consuming them. I'm happy you said it that way, because I experienced a show like that. And I'm like, this is incredible, season 1 and 2, and I'm like, okay, season 4 is too fantastical at this point. I just cannot watch this. Like, it's just
it gets
not fun
hard,
anymore.
and you lose the human connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't have to root for somebody per se, but you have to kind of be grounded and interested in it. I think. I mean, some people like that stuff. It just depends on what your taste is. But for me, I like to have a little grounding, and I think Aaron was really, really, really good at doing that in a way that wasn't like salacious or, and it was very romantic too. It was a romanticized view, and explained to people how hard the choices are.
Yeah.
What is the gray area?
Right.
You think something should be just cut and dry. I'm going to tell you why it's not.
Yeah.
You think this should happen. I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you why actually the exact opposite should happen. And it doesn't intuitively make sense, but when I walk you through it, by the end, you're going to see this is why this is the better way to do it, or the only way it could have been done, or something.
I want to talk about an episode in a second, but the point you just made, I think, is super helpful, and I think it's why we at VASA really embody this sort of thought about the salt line, right? Because the truth is, we sort of say it as these discrete sort of two things meeting at this sort of point, which is sort of true. And I think, of course, these subtexts is there's sort of this gray space, right, at this meeting point, right? And that's really where the things happen. And if you let yourself sort of exist in that sort of gray space, like that's where magic really is, right? And that's really where most decisions are made.
Yes.
That's where change happens.
Yes.
It's not often in these extreme sort of discrete black or white, 1 or 2, 0, 1 or whatever. It really is in this sort of muddled space, which is often uncomfortable to sit in, right? But that is sort of where change happens, I think.
When I first got to Washington, I was like,
As a non-Washingtonian.
as a total non-Washingtonian, only having seen these people on television. And I get there, and there's some people I'm like, oh, I don't want to meet that person. I can't talk to that person.
Right. They become a caricature of
Yeah,
themselves.
just also
in
like they're up there, they're
representation.
saying things, like, just really things that I find offensive. And I was like, I can't, And so then, of course, I'll be in a situation and then I like have to shake their hand and have a conversation. I'm like, oh, how did this happen? I supposed to, and I came with these like stalwart values. I'm not talking to this person. I'm not going to meet this person. I don't want to shake that. And so I would say to, my husband, and he was somebody who has often, when there are the government shut down, almost everyone, he has been negotiating in those rooms. And one of the things that he and I talked about, often he'll say, I'll be like, I just don't know how, it was very early on. Now I know, but I don't know how. And he was like, look, I can't remember a story he told me. It was like either John Kasich or something like that when he was in Congress, and they were having to do something when they were just cutting the budget like crazy. And, it was during, like Gingrich, and they were just coming after like every, just everything, food, just like everything.
Things you were like, it's unconscionable. Like taking,
unconscionable.
Right.
And that was the thing. And so it was about, it was probably Wick or something like that. And he had to, it was like either you go in and you talk to this person.
Right.
If you say, I'm not doing this or da-da-da, and you get nothing.
Yeah.
So, he was like, I'm not thinking about me and I'm fine. I'm thinking about all the kids who will not eat if I don't go in there. So how many kids can I get a meal for?
Right.
That's literally what I am thinking when I'm in that room. How can I appeal to this person and their sense of compassion to get these kids food?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how he thinks.
Yeah, it's a combination of being strategic and ideologic at the same time, but not too much of either.
That's right. And how do I get this person to buy in and give them cover? Sometimes it's a matter of like cover. Like how can we do?
How do I help you?
Yeah, earned income tax credit was one of his big achievements, and that is like a tax credit.
Right.
But it's
that
like,
language means something different to different people.
That's right. But
but you know that, and it goes right.
And it gives them, and then you can So and it's just been an amazing. It's giving people money back to put in their pockets.
Yeah.
Who need it the most? So yeah.
Can I ask you to take us to the writer's room for a second?
Sure.
So I watched the episode you wrote on West Wing, and I'm going to tell you my favorite one.
Okay.
My favorite one, I think, is the first one, In This White House, which was so fun for those who, they're probably super fans listening, but for those who are not super fans, it's season 2, episode 4. And I thought it was so fun. I had fresh eyes because I had never watched the show, so I didn't start from the beginning. I just watched that episode first, right? And it was incredible for tons of reasons. I loved Ainsley.
Right.
Loved her.
That was Aaron's creation.
I was going to ask you, okay, so I was curious.
He was like, we need a Republican on the show. I was like, you probably do. So he
gave you that framework, and then you wrote Ainsley.
So we worked on different storylines in that room. So that's kind of how it was often divided. That was my very first pitch in the room. When I got the job, and then I came in and I was like, watched a little bit, kind of see how the room worked. And then, there was Kevin Falls he was the person running the actual room. Aaron was in his office, and it was kind of a symbiotic relationship. And so I was like, I want to do something that is nobody's talking about. What is the thing, just kind of like what I was describing about the girls and the trafficking thing, like what is that I can do? And I was like, nobody's really talking about AIDS on the African continent right now. Nobody. How can I bring that up as an issue and yet also like create a story around it? And so I, did a whole, made some phone calls to some journalists and, did a lot of research. And then I came in and I was like, look, how about if we do this thing where a leader of an African nation is coming because, its country is being devastated, but because of the devastation, it has left room for, kind of other more radical forces to come. And so that when he leaves, they kind of try to take over in a coup. And so he's coming for one thing and is leaving. And so, when he touches down, he's not going to make it. So that was the story. And he was like,
you're
great.
A Master of Latin American Studies major coming to bear. Yeah. That's incredible.
So he was like, great, let's do it.
Wow.
And I was like, really? He was like, yeah, let's do it. That sounds great.
And you're like, now I have to write the story.
Yeah. But the fact that, there's no show I can think of on network television that would take a story like that.
Yeah.
And feature it.
It's so funny when I watched the episode. So you beat me to some of my other highlights, but it's fine. It's perfect. I loved the HIV/AIDS storyline. Of course,
Yes. Peter Parnell was very instrumental in that. And
Okay.
he's a playwright, and he mostly in Broadway. And he also wrote a really famous book that's now being banned. It's about two penguin dads.
Okay.
I'm blanking on it. It's
don't
very
remember.
famous. But
Okay.
anyway, he was great guy. And he was like, this is great because he could bring that element in, and he was so knowledgeable about
Yep.
that too. So we worked together on that, and he's really
It was so interesting when I watched it. So actually, before I say the comment,
Yeah.
so I love that part. This is, of course, a very serious thing, but I liked it from entertainment purposes. I love the African dictator storyline, in part because I personally have an addiction with like crazy geopolitical scandal. So
Get it.
you'll recognize this, right? So a few years ago, it must have been during COVID or right before, I was obsessed with the things going on in Angola, and they called it. Oh shoot, I forget the capital city's name, but whatever capital city, they called it the whatever files, and it was this huge sort of political scandal with the daughter of the former president of Angola. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah.
And so they were
really interesting.
Well, so I thought even before meeting you, I'm like, oh, this would be a great show.
Yeah.
It's a great show. The other one, and not to make light of it because there are people who
Yeah.
are obviously struggling, but the other one that resonated similar to what you talked about in this episode was in the Gambia. Just a couple years ago, where there was this democratic election.
Oh, I thought you were going to say all the women going there, but yeah.
Oh, I don't know that part
Oh
of
yeah,
the
there's
story.
a whole thing about
Really?
Oh yeah.
We'll have to get back to that later. But what I was thinking about was the president who was sort of ousted democratically. He would not leave. And, you know, they ended up having to force him to leave, but he ended up taking like the country's gold and whatever else in these planes to another dictator state, Equatorial Guinea. And so then I thought you actually were making a reference to that because the country the guy was from in the episode was from Equatorial, some other thing. It was
fake
not
name.
Guinea, but it was
Yeah.
Equatorial fake name. I'm
Yeah.
like, maybe she knew about this dictator in Equatorial
No, but
Guinea.
there's so many of those stories, sadly. You
Yeah,
know.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
The other thing that I thought about too, two things as I watched the episode was it harkened back memories of me watching a show that was much before this West Wing episode, which was A Different World, and they did an HIV/AIDS episode as well too. And of course, I was not born when that was aired. I watched it sort of as an adult, and I could only imagine sort of how radical it seemed to have an episode on that show on whatever network it was on
Yes.
about
Yeah.
HIV/AIDS in that community in particular,
Yes.
right? And so this had a very similar feeling to me of like, wow, this is incredible.
Yeah, I didn't know they did that. That is very brave and great that they did that.
Yeah. The other thing was the timing was not clear to me as to when this episode came out. I went back and checked it, but I thought I was curious if it was influenced by PEPFAR, but now I'm recognizing that PEPFAR might have been influenced by this episode, right? Because it happened afterwards,
Yeah,
right? But they were very
years
similar
after, yeah.
kinds of stories or issues, right? It's incredible how these things came together. What was your memory sort of about the reception of the episode? You wrote it, you all shot it, it was produced, and that's one thing. You're sort of happy that you're telling the story you want to tell.
Right.
And then when it airs,
Right.
there's receptions. How was it received at that time? And what were your thoughts about how it was received?
I think it was kind of groundbreaking, I mean, just even talking about any of that was on a, but they had done other stuff too, like reparations in the first season, and which you'll see,
Yeah, I'm going to
eventually
watch
see,
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, and they did it in ways that were serious. So in a way, it was like what people were expecting of the show, which is great. We did win some awards for it, which was great.
course.
And it was, one of the top shows on the air. And so, I mean, but, we were probably, I don't know, that night that it aired, I'm sure I was a single mom at the time. So
Yeah.
I'm sure I was like, I don't know, like baseball practice or something like that. I
Right.
don't know.
That's incredible. I love the episode. It really did draw me to want to become a super fan of the West Wing. So now you'll know what I'll be doing every night sort of after tonight. But I couldn't help but think about other sort of White House political sort of dramas that I did watch just because of my age and where I was when they were out. So I watched 24. I watched Scandal. That was really like my equivalent for folks who were my age when West Wing came out. Scandal was my show.
Yeah.
And
Love
it
Carrie.
was,
Carrie's
oh,
amazing.
Carrie's amazing, right?
Fantastic person.
Just an incredible person generally, and did great on that show, obviously. And it made me just think broadly about this genre of sort of White House-based political sort of shows and dramas. And I started to question like, Are they helpful? Are they harmful? Do I like them? Do I not? Why do I like them? Why are they frustrating to me? And of course, we all have many thoughts about many different things in different ways, right? So it's not sort of a singular way of thinking about it. But it occurred to me for the first time that it is a genre of show.
After the West Wing. I mean, it had been like more movies before, but I think, until somebody like Aaron does it, it's, somebody like him would have to create it, because often, most networks are not going to take a chance on like, well, maybe this would be great, maybe not. But
Right.
it's a lot, you have to spend a lot of money on that experiment to see. 24 was very much a suspense, like white knuckle show. Scandal was really like a procedural. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't a law firm, but it was like, that special kind of like crisis firm. And, it had the romance was
a new component to the show.
And that's where the romance and the private life was kind of set in that. I mean, so which made that really interesting. And, you got two great actors. Tony's also a friend, and he just is so, like, the chemistry they had, I mean, it was crazy.
It's magic.
I know.
It's
and
crazy.
It's and like they're not like they're friends.
Right, they're actually friends.
They're just buddies, but
Right.
It's like, how did they do that? But
Yeah.
they're really good actors, both
It's
of them.
incredible.
Yeah.
When I thought about that progression, or sort of this, in my mind at least, it's not new for everyone else, it's new for me, this sort of genre of sort of White House political sort of shows, starting with The West Wing. When you sort of go down the rabbit hole of thinking about it, of course, you come up to sort of the Trump era, right? And you wonder, not if those things created sort of a Trump, right? That, I think that'd be an overstatement, but they certainly create space for a Trump presidency.
Well, one
could argue.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that drives my husband crazy when we go to, parties in LA, people will literally say, I think House of Cards is exactly how it is in Washington. And you're like, and he's like, we are not killing each other. We are
Right.
not. And it's this sort of broad brush idea. And I think it is good TV. There is no denying that.
Mm-hmm.
It is good TV. It's fun. There's stakes, which is why the White House is like a good, or the Senate or whatever.
Yeah.
I get it. I mean, you have to have some basis for drama. And, but, unless you have another vision or counter for that for people to see, or if all you're seeing is that and then the news, or that
Right.
and then like dysfunction,
Right.
then people think that's reality. And then and that's just not true.
Yeah.
So it's hard. I mean, in that way, it's sort of like, it's almost like if somebody were to say to me or something like, oh, every TV show sucks. Oh, okay, well, that's fine. I get
Right.
that. It's a little different than government, because you have to vote. You have
Right.
to,
Yeah, yeah.
participate, because the consequences are so high.
Right.
So in that way, and then, it's a little more difficult to compare it. But I mean, I that's why I so appreciate what Aaron did.
Yeah.
In that sense, I mean, he brought a whole generation of people and inspired them to want to come and work in government, and, poli-sci majors. And
Well, I think that is really one of the beauties of this salt line, so to speak, right, of sort of Washington and media and entertainment in that way, right? That at its best, I think you just said it perfectly right, that it can be motivating and it can be generative, and it can sort of catapult people into, place where they want to get certain kinds of education. They want to have certain kinds of jobs. They are eager to sort of lean in, if you will, as opposed to sort of step out, right? And I think that is the beauty of how you and your colleagues and Aaron told these stories, right, is that they were inclusive. They were encouraging folks to want to be part of this process, as opposed to saying, oh my gosh, I can never. I'm sure there were some folks who didn't want it, but it wasn't because they thought it was nasty. They just thought it wasn't for them. But others were like, this is exciting. This is meaningful. And I can see myself here. And I want to sort of invest my time in our country's work. That's so meaningful.
And they were taken from real stories that really happened. And which makes it a whole other level, to me, of interest, because it's not like a documentary per se, but you are kind of documenting kind of real moves that actually really took place, and how you're going. I mean, like 9/11 happened, and we were in the room. That was a very, very, I mean, it's hard to describe all the things after that we kind of went through that are we had to talk about, like, what do you do with torture? And they had not yet decided in the government.
Right. But
We
you all were
didn't know.
brainstorming alongside.
We were writing
right.
all of these things like, okay, so then what happens? Like, do you torture people? Is it okay to torture people?
Yeah.
When is it not okay to torture people?
How do we torture people? How do we talk about it?
Yes. How do you,
Right.
and then what laws does it, because everything is governed
Yeah.
down to the,
Right.
War is governed,
Right.
Rules of engagement and military engagement.
Yeah.
That's all governed.
Yeah.
And their bodies that, kind of help decide. So, we had those conversations with them, like, how do you make it exciting and translate that to people so they have
Right.
something to think about, something that they're invested in and care about, and also care about the characters. And
I
so
love it.
that's kind of was our job.
I love
it.
it.
Gets sometimes a little too in the weeds, but
Yeah. No, I
know.
mean, I think my bias is people think about entertainment. Some people think about entertainment as often just brainless sort of candy. It's not real sort of brain food for you, right? But I think hearing these stories and hearing from those who crafted these stories, I think that turns that narrative on its head, right? That actually, it's sort of like the, Gullah Gullah Island or Sesame Street equivalent of entertainment, right? Where it's like it's actually meant to be intentionally educational and thought-provoking in ways that you may not know, but you sort of leave knowing more than you did coming in, right?
And
that's
just
exciting.
like what's some absurd thing like should we get rid of the penny? Like that was a whole thing. Like, do we get rid of the penny? What are pennies? Aren't they cost more to make than they
they're worth.
are? Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
So I have 3 things I want to do before we leave, and we're short on time. So the first is, we hear today a lot about writers, writing rooms, of course, it's in the news because of all the strikes and labor issues. I don't want to necessarily talk about that, but I do want to just open up for those, including myself, who don't know sort of how a writing room works from A to not Z. Let's go to A to C, right? Like sort of
Zeta,
at
yeah.
the top line level, sort of what is it like in a writing room? How do stories go from your brain to the show, to the screen? You sort of shared the example of this episode with Aaron, but just sort of broadly for those who are listening and seeing the news, this issue with writers, sort of what is the skeletal, fundamental way that writing for TV shows works?
They're all different.
Okay.
Every show is different.
Wow.
Every
Thank
boss
you.
is different.
Yep.
Every method is different. Depends on the genre. I only write drama. I don't do comedy. Comedy rooms are a whole other thing. I don't think I would survive in a comedy room.
Not true.
But it's, at its best, it is a play. And I've had shows where, just great, like we just had a great time. And the kind of the goal is you have a safe space, even as almost virtually strangers when you come in. You're spending 10 hours, 8 hours a day with these people, for months and months, depending on how long the order is for. But, your goal is to kind of generate ideas based on whatever the format is, but they have to come from someplace.
Yeah.
And so, you're talking a lot about, how did you lose your virginity? How did your divorce go? What was the struggle you had with your spouse?
There's real stems here.
Yeah, like you're somebody's alcoholic mother, and it really you have to go there because those are the stories that you're telling, and if you want them to have any sort of connection to people's lives, you kind of have to go there.
Yeah.
And even if you're writing on a procedural, I wrote on a show for years called Without a Trace, and it was like somebody would go missing or whatever, and you had to kind of reverse engineer what happened.
Right.
And, it was network, so it wasn't like cable.
Yeah.
It's not like writing on Narcos, but it was like, you still had to kind of come up with an emotional thread that was interesting and twisty, and you clean it up afterwards.
Yeah, right. But you have the raw stuff there, and then you sort of polish it. I love that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, that was number 1. Number 2 is I had to say, you give me a great lead in Narcos. Love Narcos. We can't talk about it too much, but I have to say my Pablo Escobar connection is that on my 28th. Well, it's a clean, easy connection. I am from Miami, but it's not
like,
that kind of a connection. No. But on my 28th birthday, we were in Cartagena, and so we went. We took these boats to whatever islands, and it was fun. But one of the boats sort of takes you by one of his downed planes that's sort of right there, and it's so cool.
It's on the little island, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I was just there,
I have a picture.
Oh,
did you like Cartagena?
Yes, I did.
Isn't it incredible?
It is.
It's beautiful.
It
the
is.
architecture is amazing. The food is incredible.
It is. All of it.
Loved Cartagena.
I know.
It was incredible.
I think people have a really good, it was just after COVID.
Oh, so when did you go?
Just like not like last summer, not last summer, but not this one, but the one right before.
I was there the summer before that.
Oh, okay.
But it was right. I had my vaccines. I
Yeah.
was able to go for my
Yeah.
birthday. It was so fun. So I had to make my Narcos comment because I loved Narcos. And I should say, for better or for worse, it sort of humanized Pablo Escobar to me.
Well,
I mean, I know that's how drug lords work, right? I mean,
Right.
they have to be human
I
to sort of be
know.
able to succeed in some way.
Well, one of the things that, because of kind of coming from that discipline of the West Wing, I'm all, and Vassar too, just all about the research, because I think the research, just having, like I said, the verisimilitude is so important. And, it's not like I determine this, but
Right.
one of the big things we talked about in the room, one, do we change the language? Do we use like, do we let them speak in their native thing, or does everything how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
And how much do you kind of show the origins of like the entire cocaine?
Right.
Because it is.
Yeah,
It is.
please.
I mean, to think that this one situation has turned into what we have today, it just blows my mind.
Right. There are tentacles everywhere.
It just, the economy, I mean, I don't even know how many trillions are in. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't even,
Right.
my mind
Fathom or
cannot wrap
conceive it, yeah.
around it. But that story, the impact that it has had on humanity
Yeah.
is just incredible to me.
It is.
And to see it, how it started, and to see
How it grew.
and
Yeah.
what he did, and
Yeah.
how ruthless, like he would befriend,
Right.
get to know you, and then you were dead. And then he would take your stuff over and move on to the next. And it just kept going
kept
and going and
going.
going. Nobody was as ruthless as him. It was because he was so ruthless.
Yeah.
He changed the game. That's how he changed it. He just was
Gosh.
like, I'm going to go there.
Gosh. It's crazy.
Yeah, he was a
But it's a
real
good story.
gangster. Yeah.
Oh
Oh,
my
my God.
gosh.
Yeah. And then he became almost like his own mini.
Oh, yeah.
Dictator.
Oh, yeah. No, 100%. He was his
know?
own country
Yes.
at that point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Could have paid down the national debt.
Our last thing is our student hot seat questions. So I have 3 questions. I'll go through them quickly. The first is, what story have you always wanted to tell but have not told yet?
Oh, I've got 2.
Okay, let's go. Let's do both.
One is the story, I started it a little bit
Okay.
on the West Wing. I did a story, my family, Stockbridge Muncie, on my mom's side, my mom's grandfather. And, him and then the relatives, his brother and, his mom and whatever, all went to Carlisle Indian School and played football. And football was not football until till the First Nations invented football. And that is a story that involves Pop Warner as their coach.
Wow.
It involves, Teddy Roosevelt.
Is Pop Warner a real person? I feel so naive saying
he was
this.
the most winning coach of all time up until like recently.
I feel so bad saying this. I only asked that because growing up, I grew up in a very
In Pop Warner
football-heavy.
football.
They called it Pop
Right, and
Warner
you're
football.
like,
I
yeah.
didn't know what it was.
Who would? Unless you're a football
my goodness.
person. Yeah.
Thank you for telling me that. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
And,
didn't want to interrupt you.
No. It's all good. And it was right after, all the native tribes had been, pushed into what are, agencies or
Yeah.
reservations. And there were only like 250,000 people left. And so they were required to go to boarding schools. And this was, I tried to pitch this to Hollywood years ago, and they're like, I would go in and people would look at me like I was crazy. They're like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And I was like, no. Carlisle, mandatory. Every Native American who was between this age and they had to go 5 years. And I would explain it. And they were like, incomprehensible to them. But it was a story about football and how football, at the same time, a very historic, like a landmark Supreme Court case involving a plaintiff who was one of the sons of a chief who was at the school and played football, and how that was happening at the same time. And when it was decided, they won the most incredible against West Point, which had like Eisenhower,
Oh, wow.
Patton,
Yeah.
Bradley on the football team
Right.
that they were playing. These are the sons of the chiefs playing against future generals in our army. And then they won. It was this like, it's like books written about it.
Yeah.
It's so historic. And then at the same time, this court case they lost and lost control of, I think, 97% of the land.
Oh, wow. That's one. What's the second?
Brown versus Board. And to know what Thurgood and Charles Houston did. Charles Houston, people don't know. So Charles Houston and Margold, who they were both law school students at Harvard in the 30s. And Charles Houston was a son of a, whatever, I think his dad might have been a lawyer, but they were both in law school. Margold had just left the pogroms from Eastern Europe. And they set out and they said, there's a way to reverse Plessy.
Yeah.
We can do this. We can get rid of Jim Crow. And they kind of did a blueprint. And then it wasn't implemented until years later. Charles Houston started Howard Law School, built up, the case law. And then from the case law, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, they were trying all those cases. And then he gave it to Thurgood. And Thurgood was doing all the cases. Mostly what they were doing were the lynching cases after World War II. It kind of got bogged down in that. And they weren't progressing anymore. And then they were like, you know what, now's the time.
Yeah.
So that's when they did the Brown case with the school kids. And what people don't understand is those cases, once they won Brown, those cases became, because you win the case, now you have to implement it and challenge it everywhere, in every situation. Schools, buses, trains, everything, lunch counters. That was a civil rights movement. And people don't see how...
The connection.
They don't get that was the second part of it.
Right.
And they see Brown as like, schools. No, Brown was getting rid of... It was desegregation.
Right.
And Connie Motley, who was this, she's the first black woman... federal judge, but she was the one who tried and won all of her cases.
Oh my gosh.
And, Jack Greenberg, Jewish, and that was very controversial that he wound up running the Legal Defense Fund. And the stories are just the bravery of the kids and the people, the plaintiffs, are just every step of the way, all of it, Little Rock, all of them. How I feel like people, if they could see what these people did, not for themselves, because they knew they were in danger. They knew, but what it meant for everybody else, and that they were willing to sacrifice that in order for other people to.
I love it.
To do, and it just the stories. And again, that's another one. Like
we gotta get LDF to partner with someone to get that story told.
You don't need to fictionalize anything.
Yeah, this is just the story.
It's so good. It's
my
such
goodness.
a great story.
I'm going to get yelled at if I don't take you out of here, so we have to finish. But for those who are listening, I will ask the other questions on our walk to our next place, and you'll hear them in the recap at some point later on. But Allison, it's been so fun chatting with you.
Likewise.
To get a behind-the-scenes view of your life, the shows you worked on, Washington, just reveals so much that we can learn from, we can be inspired by, and I'm so grateful that you shared those thoughts with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you
really
so
fun.
much. Thank you, and thank you all for joining us here at the Salt Line. See you next time. Bye.